Hello and welcome to episode 194 of Herpetological Highlights, the podcast all about reptile and amphibian science. My name's Tom Major. Co-hosting with me, as always, is Ben Marshall.
Hey.
And as we approach our 200th episode, we are revisiting an old topic, which I feel like every time these creatures come up on the podcast, we say we never talk about them, but we sometimes do. And this is salamanders. We're talking about salamanders.
We never talk about salamanders.
We occasionally, we have a few times. We've talked about the parachuting one. We tried to talk about their weird sex habits way back in like episode 16 or something. I remember that being an absolute mission to understand.
Yep.
And now it's completely left my head.
Occasionally they come up as some sort of toxic prey. That's true. They've snuck their way into episodes that way as well. Yeah,
that's actually a good point.
And a couple of species of bi-weeks, actually.
That's true. Yeah, there's a lot of diversity of these things, and they are continuously being described. Particularly, actually, this family we're going to talk about today. So I will introduce the paper. This is by Ryan, Kuchta, Watling, Hickerson, Anthony, 2024, Colour Polymorphism and Phylogeographic Variation of Agonistic Behaviour in the Eastern Red-backed Salamander Plethodon cinereus, published in Herpetologica. So, lots of words to unpack there in the title, but we are talking about a salamander from the northeast of USA and eastern Canada, and this is Plethodon cinereus, the red-backed salamander. Quite a small salamander, like 5 to 12 centimetres total length, and it's from this family Plethodontidae, the lungless salamanders. So they have no lungs, which is like bizarre. They look like an animal that would have a lung, but they don't have a lung.
Yeah, I mean that's true. They do look like they should have lungs.
Yeah, they really do. You think, how are you getting by? But they do. But yeah, this family Plethodontidae has over 500 species, and by far this is the largest family of salamanders.
Oh, that's like a Nolus levels.
Yeah, it's a lot of salamanders. It's a little bit out of control. 500 different species in this one family, but yeah, they're known for their diversity. They're quite cool. This species, as is the case for all members of the genus Plethodon, which is within the family Plethodontidae, eggs are laid in these terrestrial cavities, and they are looked after by the female. The female guards the eggs, and the larval stage occurs within the egg capsule itself. So basically, when it hatches out of the egg, it's already a fully developed hatchling, and the gills only kind of persist for a few days, so they develop quite quickly, these things, with the mothers guarding the eggs. And the juveniles have these massive heads that makes them look really adorable. They have big heads, and this means that they can eat sort of a wide variety of invertebrates, including quite wide invertebrates, which is pretty good. But this paper's about their sort of territoriality, isn't it, really?
Yes, so as they described it, antagonistic behaviour, so propensity to fight each other.
Exactly. And territorial behaviour is widespread among salamanders which are terrestrial, many of which are in this family Plethodontidae. So it's quite common that this family of salamanders will produce territorial salamanders. And they use 4 characteristics, scientists who research territoriality, which diagnose whether or not a species is territorial. And so these are site tenacity, which I just love as a phrase. Like site tenacity.
Yes.
It's almost a little bit vague.
I'm assuming that's getting at sticking at the same location.
Exactly.
Doggedly staying at the same location.
Yeah, essentially.
Yeah.
In the case of these salamanders, I think it is just like staying in the same place. They also have to advertise that it's their location. So these salamanders do it with pheromones. They leave pheromones around the area which is their territory.
Yep.
Then you have aggressive defense, which is exactly what it sounds like, a salamander which is just setting out to aggressively defend what it perceives to be its territory. And then you've got expulsion of intruders, which these salamanders are also not shy about. So yeah, they'll battle for supremacy using threat postures. So they'll do aggressive displays, which involves raising themselves up onto they call it a trunk raise, don't they? So they basically raise themselves up, show off like their bellies. Like a sort of
push-up.
Yeah, that's it. And they'll also bite if push comes to shove. They will bite their opponents. Apparently they'll also expel their enemies from cover objects using violence. So they'll literally pick them up and chuck them out with their mouths. And people who study these salamanders have known for a while that if you look for an individual salamander, you can reliably find it in the same place again and again. And there's very little overlap in where you'll find these salamanders hanging out. So their territories are quite neatly defined. Like, you're not likely to see salamanders spreading too much into the territory of others.
So what we don't have, way back, one of my favourite papers I think we covered was the one that was questioning territoriality in a species of Anolis. And it was the whole, like, there were actually multiple mating strategies going on, where you had, it's like, oh yeah, they're territorial, and you've got a big male that defends his territory, but it was missing the complete other side of the equation with other males having other strategies and female choice and stuff. This is the way you're describing it is very much not the case. Like, they're kind of locked in, they're more sort of tightly territorial, more consistently located in the spot, and I don't know, it just seems like a much closer fit to how you would define territoriality than sort of other lizard examples.
It seems more simplistic and more neat, doesn't it?
Yeah,
like they're actually
salamanders have it down.
They're all just purely savage to any other salamander that comes within range of what they perceive to be their territory. And so we know we have this territorial little beast, but what about their coloration? So red-backed salamanders come in different color morphs. The two most commonly occurring are the striped or red-backed morph, hence the name red-backed salamander. But you can also get the unstriped or lead-backed morph, which is just plain sort of slaty grey, right? But if we look at the whole range in northeast North America, populations in the east tend to have the red stripe, while central populations in the middle are more mixed, a mixture of red and grey. And then the populations in the west have much more of the unstriped lead-backed individuals. And so you have this kind of geographic variation in the numbers of how many of each morph. And there's been some study of how aggressive these salamanders are. And the red-backed ones are actually considered generally to be the most aggressive. Perhaps red, in this case, singles rage and fear. But yeah, they wanted to sort of test whether or not that actually stood true. They wanted to see whether or not the red-backed ones would go harder and win battles. And they did that with resident intruder tests.
There's a sort of second question here, though, isn't there? Because some of the populations are polymorphic, so they have both these different color morphs in them. And I don't know, I think polymorphism is something that we bring up on the podcast a lot, because there's a lot of people asking questions. Why on earth does it continue to persist? Surely one would just become better and therefore more dominant and push the other morph out because it's less advantageous, right? And this is another one of those questions. Is okay, so what if the striped ones are more aggressive? Wouldn't that just mean they sort of win out? Or maybe they lose out because they're overexerting themselves and, they've picked the wrong strategy, so the unstriped would win out? So how is either or persisting in this multi-colormorphic, polycolomorphic population in the center there?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And so they set out to test this by taking salamanders from all these different populations and putting them in... Is this a Thunderdome, Ben, do you think? Is this a Thunderdome situation here? They're sort of being put together. I mean, they might fight.
Yeah, I mean, it pretty much is. It's introducing an intruder salamander
to another edition of Thunderdome!
Yeah, it's Thunderdome.
Yeah. No, I agree.
They basically put them in a petri dish. And bear in mind, these are very small salamanders. And then they would let the salamander take residency of the petri dish. So after a little while, the salamander begins to feel as though that's its petri dish.
Yeah.
And if you then introduce another salamander, the expectation is that there'll be some kind of territorial dispute.
They also did a control as well, just to cover their bases, of a rolled up wet paper towel of a similar size to the resident salamander.
Mate, if I was in a trial which was like combat related, and I found out that what they were using as a control for me was a wet paper towel rolled up,
I mean,
I'd be furious.
I mean, I think you'd be a little mixed, right? Because, like, bright side, well, all you've got to do is fight a wet paper towel.
Yeah, it's true.
And confirmation that you're going to be, well supported by folk that like the underdog.
Yes, that's true. Essentially, they thought that first of all, they thought the red-backed ones would be more aggressive. And then they also thought that the red-backed ones that came from purely red-backed populations would be really aggressive because there's loads of red-backed ones. Surely that's like crazy there. But that wasn't the case, right, when they did these trials. In fact, it was the central mixed population, which had a mixture of red-backed and lead-backed salamanders, which had more trunk raising and aggression. which is quite curious. So their assumption about the red-backed ones was kind of proven to not necessarily be true.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and the sort of other aspect of that, so they were. It was pretty skewed towards the residents being the more aggressive of the two when they were introduced to each other. So there was a much more active defense than there was from, this it's sort of the intruder being introduced, not as aggressive. But I do wonder whether that might be a little bit of a artifact of how they're testing, because they're having to actively introduce that intruder. So maybe their heart's not all in it.
Yeah, they also came up with some other sort of reasons why they may or maybe more or less aggressive across the different groups. Because was it the case that the eastern populations were the most aggressive of the three, central, western, eastern?
Sorry, the most eastern of the... We've got the central group, which are the mixed ones, and we've got the eastern group that are just the red-backed, colour morph ones. Right.
Yeah. And so they were expected to be more aggressive, but in fact they weren't.
Right.
Yeah. And they talk about a few reasons why it might be the case that there might be reasons for the different levels of sort of territoriality. In other studies, prey availability, so how strongly they're competing for prey, can have an influence. Even, these are salamanders, so moisture on the forest floor can affect it. They're probably more able to be aggressive when it's a little bit more moist. Whether or not they have parasites, competitive species, predators. And so they actually come up with quite a cool example of a potential competitor of these small salamanders, which is the Allegheny mountain dusky salamander. And apparently the presence or absence of this species is thought to be able to impact the social dynamics and levels of aggression in Plethodon cinereus that we're talking about, the red-backed salamander. And because both of these species often overlap in their microhabitat distribution, so they like similar sort of areas, and the Allegheny mountain dusky salamander has been shown to be able to displace the red-backed salamander via aggressive interference.
By pure
so
power.
It could be,
yeah.
and so what they said was that this Allegheny mountain dusky salamander coincides with the populations in the eastern group, but not the central group. And so that eastern group, which was expected to be aggressive, actually has to live alongside this mountain dusky salamander, which can frequently dominate it. And so it could be that because they live alongside these other salamanders, which will just frequently batter them, they become less aggressive because it's not worth trying to compete with this other salamander.
It's not advantageous at that point. You've got to try something else because these dusky salamanders will basically outcompete you in a straight fight. Yeah.
They'll just come in and wreck you. So, I thought that was just a really interesting idea. And obviously then when you start looking at it in those terms, you can't really just take populations of salamanders and look at their differences. You have to consider the groups, the sort of interspecies relationships and everything else that they're sort of existing within.
Yes.
And
I think the other neat one is so that's quite an external factor, right? A separate species that's competing. They did also mention a couple of papers that there might be assortive mating by colour in the polymorphic populations. So you had a tendency for the red-backed salamander morph to mate with others of that colour morph. And then there's sort of competition within these sort of sub-populations, potentially. And I could imagine, if you're only mating with individuals of a more similar colour morph, that might be a sort of reduced pool of choice, potentially heightening that competition between individuals for fewer sort of mating partners, right? So that's one that they highlighted is there are sort of internal dynamics as well occurring within the polymorphic group.
Yeah, that's crazy as well, because that just goes back to what we were saying at the start, why do both of these colours persist?
Right, there's got to be some intermixing there. Or
there must be some, otherwise they would speciate.
Right. Or maybe they are, and it's just taking a bit of time.
Wow, that'd be crazy.
I mean, we're talking. How many species were in this genus? 500 plus?
Yeah, 500.
There you go. There's going to be 502 in a minute. Just give them a second.
There's a lot of species. sort of an interesting case of different colour morphs, well, defying expectations, but also demonstrating differing levels of aggression across populations. And yeah, the kind of questions that raises about the experiences of these different salamanders, even though they're the same, they are all collectively one species. In different areas, they have different pressures and different assemblages of other animals they've got to compete with.
Yeah.
I just wanted to mention the species epithet of this species. It's Plethodon cinereus, the red-backed salamander. But that name, cinereus, actually means ash-coloured, which
Like the
refers to the
unstriped
dorsal
ones.
coloration of the lead-backed phase. Yeah,
Huh.
so the common name is about the red ones, but the scientific name is about the grey ones.
Well, that seems quite appropriate, I feel.
A little bit of keeping it fair. Yeah.
I do want to
Yeah.
highlight one sort of final thing as we're sort of wrapping up here, is highlighting how close the different populations were. They were split basically down the middle by a river. That on one side you've got the polymorphic, on the other side you've got the monomorphic. But the actual difference between the two populations is what, like 15, 20 kilometers looking at the map, something like that. So it's like a very small, I certainly, in relation to their overall distribution, it feels like quite a small space to have something that's not just visually different, but behaviorally different, just separated by a river.
Yeah.
Seems, kind of cool that it's happening
Yeah,
at such
it's
a small
kind of crazy.
scale.
I know, yeah, when you suddenly realise even, rivers are this actual massive, even an animal like a salamander, which you'd think, well, if it really wanted to, maybe it could get across. But yeah, rivers can really separate things for like millions of years. Isn't it a river that split up bonobos and chimpanzees?
Oh, I
think it
don't
might
know.
be.
Maybe.
Yeah, I think it might be. Anyway, yeah, let's move on, shall we, to our species of the bye week?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, here we have a paper by Hughes, Behangana, Lukwago, Menegon, Dehling, Wagner, Tilbury, South, Kusamba, and Greenbaum. Taxonomy of the Rhampholeon boulengeri complex. 5 new species from Central Africa's Albertine Rift. All right, so we've got some new chameleons.
Lots of tiny chameleons.
Lots of tiny chameleons that look the same as each other for the most part.
They look quite similar, yeah.
But they're famous for looking similar, Rhampholeon, this genus of little chameleons. Like, that's their whole thing. They all look the same. It's like really hard to tell them apart. A lot of it's like, I don't know if there's hemipenal morphology, maybe, but usually it's like elevation, bit of genetics. I don't think they had hemipenal stuff in here, but yeah, usually it's like elevation, genetics, range, like
Sense.
the species are pretty difficult to tell apart otherwise.
Attitude.
Attitude, yeah,
Go-getterness.
attitude, dynamism. Yeah, but yeah, so in a recent, there was a molecular study going back a few years ago, and this pygmy chameleon, Rhampholeon boulengeri, was shown to contain 6 genetically distinct but phenotypically cryptic, which just means they look alike, lineages. And so we're in the Albertine Rift in Central Africa here, and like I say, these chameleons live at varying altitudes and seem to have like non-overlapping ranges generally. And yeah, these authors are describing 5 new species from Rhampholeon, which has a leaf-like phenotype, which basically just means their whole strategy is, I'm a leaf, just chill, leave me alone, don't worry about it, I'm a leaf.
Yeah.
That's kind of what they do. They're very small,
They're pretty
they live
effective,
on the forest floor.
I think, too. For in terms of animals that try to look like leaves, they're pretty good.
They're up there. They're
no like leaf insect, but for a vertebrate, pretty damn good.
Do they bring the vibe with the sort of wibbly wobbly backwards forwards thing?
I think that helps, doesn't it? Just that gentle
I think
movement,
they
like
probably-
a little breeze through the bushes. Yeah.
Because some animals will try and act like a leaf, but when it comes to actually doing the dance, they're not doing the dance. They're just pure doing the visual image. Like, those slugs in Thailand that look exactly like a leaf, like a wet leaf. And you're just like, how is that not a wet leaf? But it's not doing a special dance, is it, to look more leaf-like? It's just
not putting in the
slowly.
effort, mate.
These chameleons, they do look quite leafy. But they also have a hilarious little stubby tail that most chameleons don't have. They're actually one of few that lack a prehensile tail. So they can't use it for climbing. Obviously, you don't need it.
Lack a tail.
They almost lack a tail. It's like a little nub. I think the males have bigger tails than the females because they got to store hemipenes in them, which is kind of a snaky thing. So that's kind of cool. But yeah, they all look really similar, these chameleons, which makes identifying the different species quite difficult. But these guys have gone ahead and done it with some genetic and morphological analysis. And I reckon there's 5 here, but maybe we just bash through 3, talk about them, why they're kind of interesting. Let's start off, Ben, with Rhampholeon nalubale, the goddess pygmy
Now,
chameleon.
see, I misread this the first time I read it, and I read it as the godless pygmy chameleon.
Oh, wow. Godless. Absolute heathen of a chameleon, this one.
I don't know how a chameleon would be godless, but I support their endeavours.
That would actually be a class name for a chameleon, because I feel like chameleons, they do have a sort of reputation for being a little bit sinister, a little bit demonic. People don't trust them.
Yes,
in folklore,
that comes up in different
sinister
places, doesn't it? They have a, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the creepy eyes, always watching.
Yeah,
like I can understand how that could enter folklore quite easily.
Yeah. Back in the day, you didn't know what to worry about.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Godless chameleons.
Goddess chameleon, but of course it is the goddess pygmy chameleon, and that's because this specific epithet, nalubale, is derived from the Luganda word nalubale, which means a spirit of feminine qualities, i.e. a goddess, but it's also the name for Lake Victoria, which is nearby, so that's quite cool. But this species in particular, for me at least, is probably the most interesting one they've described here, because they talk about it maybe being parthenogenetic as a species. Only females have ever been found, and they found very little genetic differentiation between different individuals compared to other similar species. And obviously, if you're a parthenogenetic animal, you're all female, and you're either giving birth or laying eggs which contain clones of yourself. In the case of these guys, they'll be laying a few eggs. And so, yeah, that's the fact that there's very little genetic differentiation between individuals, and the fact that only females have been found kind of suggests that maybe these things are just cloning themselves, laying eggs, and not actually mating.
That would be,
however,
kind of fascinating, wouldn't it?
It'd be kind of crazy for a chameleon as well.
Apparently, we're just talking about salamanders and stuff, and we know there's also weird populations of salamanders going on, but chameleons are kind of very different beast.
Yeah, and parthenogenesis is kind of one of the coolest things, actually, that reptiles do. Really like it. But yeah, just reading the paper, there's been a lot of chat, a little bit of murmurs about this Rhampholeon boulengeri being all female. But now it kind of looks like maybe it was just populations which have been described as this species were all female. And yeah, maybe we'll shed some more light on that. The other interesting thing about Rhampholeon nalubale, the goddess pygmy chameleon, is that they have these fluorescent tubercles.
Shiny bones.
So these like bony... Pardon?
Shiny bones.
Shiny bones. Yep, they got the shiny eye bones, which are these like little tubercles, little lumps of bone around the eyes. And if you shine a ultraviolet light around their eyes, it will fluoresce back at you in a fluorescent color. The pigment inside the bones, something inside the bones is converting that UV light to a visible spectrum that we can see. We're like, ooh. Humans love this because it's really brightly coloured, but the jury's really out on whether or not this actually has a role for the chameleons, or whether it doesn't do anything and I can't remember if they can see it or not. But the other thing that's strange about this is that if this is a species which is all female, surely the need for individual recognition is like massively reduced.
Maybe
because I thought the individual recognition,
or maybe they're quite social.
Maybe they're social. Yeah, it's so true. Yeah. Could be. Well, they could still be recognizing each other as competition, specifically, I guess.
Yeah, or friends.
Or friends, mates. Yeah, why not? Why not?
What we need, for this whole tubercle thing, is we need an additional Thunderdome, but a sort of mate choice Thunderdome, where you paint little bits of sort of Tipex over the tubercle ends, so they don't fluoresce for the other chameleon. Let's see how that goes. Depending on if we remember correctly that they can see them or not. I can't remember.
And then you ask the chameleon, what is that over there? And if it doesn't know that it's a chameleon, then you'll know.
Yeah.
But yeah,
that's the idea.
Totally see that they could actually, it would actually be so cool if like you painted over those tubercles and then introduced the chameleons, and the other chameleon just started acting proper strange. Like, what is this?
I don't get it.
I don't even know what this animal is. I don't even know where to start. So yeah, really cool. Again, looks like a little leaf, this one. Not really anything particularly remarkable.
50mm SVL leaf, to be precise.
Yeah.
So little.
To believe. So the next one that caught my eye was the one they've called the Albertine Rift pygmy chameleon. This is a hard one to pronounce. Rhampholeon Misitugrubensis. That's a challenging one. And so, but the specific epithet, Misitugrubensis, which I'm surely butchering, is derived from the Swahili word for forest, Misitu, and the German word for Rift Valley graben, in reference to the Albertine Rift forests where the species occurs. So we've got a bit of Swahili German coming in, but it basically means Albertine Rift forests, which is quite cool. And this one looks similar, very leafy, but it has a nice white chin.
They're so similar.
Yeah, I know. It's like, what do you pick out? How does it look different? They got like nice little stripes on them. They're cool. They're all cool. And then the final one that I thought was cool was Rhampholeon Monteslunae, Mountains of the Moon pygmy chameleon, and the specific epithet Monteslunae, derived from the Latin words for mountain, mons, and moon, luna. So Mountains of the Moon, in reference to the original phrase for the Rwenzori Mountains, Monteslunae, or Mountains of the Moon, which is where these guys are from in Uganda. So, yep, Mountains of the Moon, named for the Rwenzori Mountains. And so they've called it Rhampholeon Monteslunae. That's really cool. Mountain of the Moon's chameleon.
They look a little bit rounder too, in my opinion. They're a little bit shorter, but
more moonish.
They just give a little bit more of a moon shape. I don't know if I'm just having that presented to me, and now I'm seeing what I want to see. But
yes,
I think it's great.
Would an unbiased observer who hadn't heard that name still call them moonish?
Probably not.
Maybe, possibly. But yeah, the habitats all look nice forest, lush, wet, altitude, a little bit of altitude in these forests as well.
So a whole bunch of really awesome tiny chameleons, and one that potentially is a really mysterious, potentially all-female group that rely on parthenogenesis, maybe, ? Need to look into it more?
Yeah, that's Rhampholeon nalubale, might be a parthenogenetic species. They often result from two other species hybridizing. I don't know whether that's the case here. We never know.
I mean, with so many species about, it doesn't seem impossible, does it?
It could have also happened like 100 million years ago. I don't know. Maybe that's too far. I don't know when chameleons. Maybe more 70. I don't know when chameleons came about.
I don't know. I'm trying to remember my Madagascar split history stuff, but
Okay. Yeah, they shortly after the extinction of the dinosaurs, 65 milli.
Yeah. So they've had some time to come up with some solutions.
So if the dinosaurs were still here, we just probably wouldn't even have chameleons. They wouldn't have had the chance.
Maybe they'd be even better.
Maybe. So yeah. Cool. There we go. So 5 new. There are a couple of other more species if you want to check out the paper in the Rhampholeon boulengeri complex. So yeah, 5 brand new species. Really nice paper. Have you got any other business, Ben?
I do not.
Okay. So I just wanted to say that both Ben and myself are going to be at the World Congress of Herpetology in Kuching, Borneo. We're really excited about this. This is August 4th to August 9th. We're going to be doing a live mini podcast during the meeting as well at some point. So yeah, it'd be really cool. Hopefully, we might meet some people who listen to the podcast there. That'd be nice. Definitely come and say hello. And yeah, just looking forward to going to Borneo principally, and fun conference.
It should be great fun.
Loads of stuff.
Yeah,
herpetology. And now I really wanted to go to the World Herpetology. What is it called? World Congress of Herpetology. When it was in New Zealand 3 years ago. Yeah, but wasn't feasible at that point in time. But look at us now.
Quite distant. New Zealand.
Yes. New Zealand's like another degree of far for us.
Kuching's not exactly
the quickest way would be to it'd be quicker to go through the earth. It really is on the other side. Whereas, Borneo's still far, but it's slightly less far. But yeah. So yeah, excited for that.
Super
Hopefully
excited,
see some people there. But yeah, that's all I had to mention really. So I think if you want to get in touch with us, you can. herphighlights@gmail.com. If you've got any corrections, questions, anything like that, please do get in touch.
Absolutely.
You can find us on social media. But yeah, patreon.com/herphighlights if you'd like to support the podcast. Thanks to those that do. But yeah, other than that, all that remains to be said is thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening.